in the sea. The herring is the one for me. How are you today? How are you today? How are you today? Me, himmy-o, which is Scottish for friends. What do you do with a herring's eyes?
What do you do with a herring's eyes?
Oh, you make 'em into puddings and pies, herring's eyes,
Puddings and pies.
and all manner of things. And of all the fishes that swim in the sea, the herring is the one for me. What do you do with a herring's head?
Oh, what do you do with a herring's head?
Oh, you make it into loaves of bread, herring's head,
Loaves of bread.
herring's eyes,
Puddings eyes.
and all manner of things. Of all the fishes that swim in the sea, the herring is the one for me. How are you today? How are you today? How are you today?
How are you today?
How are you today?
How are you today?
How are you today? Me, himmy-o. What do you do with a herring's belly?
What do you do with a herring's belly?
You make it into jams and jelly. Herring's belly.
Jams and jelly.
Herring's head.
Loaves of bread.
Herring's eyes.
Puddings and pies.
And all manner of things. And of all the fishes that swim in the sea, the herring is the one for me. How are you today? How are you today? How are you today? Me, himmy-o. End of my tale. What do you do with a herring's tail?
What do you do with a herring's tail?
Make it into bottles of ale, ginger. Herring's tail,
Bottles of ale.
herring's belly,
Jams and jelly.
herring's head,
Loaves of bread.
herring's eyes,
Puddings and pies.
and all manner of things. Final chorus of all the fishes that swim in the sea. The herring is the one for me. I'm Simeon Martin, and when I was 8 years old, in the middle of the 1700s, my mother gave me the license to live. I could go down with the other kids to the Palmer at the bottom of the hill here. Our house was close by, and we could go fishing. That day, I went down the hill to the river. There wasn't any river. It was all filled with fish. There were so many herring running up the river. Of course, the dam wasn't there. I know I've been keeping tabs on that from my grave. You know, Shad Factory Pond for the Orleans cotton mill wasn't even there. They go right on up, all the way to the top up in near Attleboro. And those herring running up to spawn were so thick, they said you could walk across the river on the backs of herring. This fellow who was over in Europe, Louis Agassiz, was going around spreading a new story. Instead of all these big rocks that we see, many times right where we don't want them, the story then was that Noah's flood put him there. Well, Louis Agassiz said, I've seen Scotland. I'm from Switzerland. I've seen glaciers. I've seen what they do to the landscape. They move big rocks. And when they melt, he said, they leave a lot of tracks behind. And he said, Rehoboth, he came here actually, and said Rehoboth is very interesting because right where we are, the glacier was melting in the summer, freezing in the winter, melting and freezing and melting and freezing. It just sat here, and all the water that came off the glacier went into big crevasses and cracks in the glacier and ran down on me because the top of the glacier was way up there. And it dropped all that sand and silt right under our feet. But over there behind the, what are those? Automobiles? I've heard about those. That's a very steep slope. And over here, very steep slope. The glacier dropped big chunks of ice, just like the sand in some of those parking lots you have when they plow them and those piles with sand in them take forever to melt. Well, the big chunks of ice took forever to melt, but when they melted, down went the top of the land, and there were kettles, deep spots, all around this hill. But this was a great place to find a grave and dig a grave because it was just sand. In fact, those two trees, you could only find them down on Cape Cod, pitch pine trees, because they can survive with their feet in sand, total sand. It also takes all the liquids away from bodies. So it's a perfect place for a cemetery. And it used to be called Bullock's Hill Cemetery. Now, if we go a little farther south, just past those houses over there, I think Joe and Allie and Ryland's house, boom, it's an outwash plain. It didn't melt and freeze, it just melted. And all of the sand and silt went out that way and was flat as a pancake, and that was the perfect soil for farms to feed Providence. But you go up north of, what is that road, 44? Put numbers on them now. We used to call them by names. I used to live on Martin Street. Anybody here from Martin Street? Oh, back there, I think there's someone from Martin Street. Okay. And I know there's one, Steve Martin, they said was still on Martin Street. But, so to the north of 44, the glacier dug out the ground and brought it all down here and dumped it here. And moved a lot of boulders and cut out cliffs like Rocky Hill and Hillside. That's the steep part up there that was eroded and dug deep by the glacier and made steep hillsides. So we're in a very interesting moraine, Louis Agassiz said. I'm going to call it a moraine. Not that you get more rain than less rain here, but that it's all the sand, like Long Island dropped at the edge of the melting glacier. So I would study the stars and know that the North Star was up there. That's the north. And that the Big Dipper would be the Little Dipper would be pointing to the North Star. And I learned about the moons. The 13, 14 moons that make up the year. Does anybody know what the full moon is called tonight?
Hunter.
The Hunter's moon up here in the northern hemisphere, because that's the full moon that rises even before the sun sets, so that there's light all day long and all night long for hunting. And now you can start putting up game for the winter after you've harvested in September to put up the grain, the corn, the wheat, and get everything to the grist mills down on the Palmer so you could grind it up for eating in the winter. So this is the Hunter full moon here. Interestingly, I also learned that it wasn't just in North America, that this full moon tonight comes up in South America. And guess what time of year it is there? Spring. And the fish, like the herring, are running up the rivers down there. So what do they call the moon? The fish moon. The lively moon. It keeps them alive because they get so much food from the fish. Of all the fishes that swim in the sea, the heron is the one for me. How are you today? How are you today? How are you today? Himio, which is Scottish for friends. What do you do with a herring's eyes?
What do you do with a herring's eyes?
Oh, you make them into puddings and pies, herring's eyes,
Puddings and pies.
and all manner of things.